The grand ballroom looked like something out of a fairy tale that Saturday evening. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting warm light over tables decorated with white roses and gold ribbons. Soft music played in the background as guests in elegant dresses and sharp suits mingled, their laughter mixing with the gentle clink of champagne glasses. Rachel had worked at Riverside Manor for 3 years now, and she'd seen plenty of fancy weddings. But tonight's reception was something special. The couple getting married came from one of the wealthiest families in town, and they hadn't held back on any detail. Everything from the silk tablecloths to the imported flowers screamed luxury. At 28 years old, Rachel had gotten pretty good at balancing trays full of drinks while weaving through crowds in heels. It wasn't the career she'd dreamed of as a kid, but it paid the bills. Most nights anyway. She smiled politely as she refilled water glasses at table 7, listening to guests gush about how beautiful the ceremony had been. The bride looked absolutely stunning, one woman said, adjusting her pearl necklace. And that venue they chose for the ceremony? Gorgeous, her companion added. I heard they flew in flowers from Ecuador. Rachel nodded along, keeping her professional smile in place. She'd learned early on that being invisible was part of the job. Guests wanted their glasses full and their plates cleared, but they rarely wanted to actually see the person doing it. That was fine with her. It made the work easier in a way. As she moved toward the kitchen to grab another tray of appetizers, something caught her eye. There, positioned perfectly near the dance floor, sat a beautiful black grand piano. The overhead lights made its polished surface gleam like a mirror. Rachel stopped walking for just a moment, forgetting herself. The piano was a Steinway, probably worth more than she'd make in 5 years of serving drinks and clearing plates. During dinner, a professional pianist had played classical pieces that drifted over the dining guests like a gentle breeze. The music had been beautiful, each note crisp and clear. But about an hour ago, the pianist had packed up his music sheets and left early. Something about a family emergency, she'd heard from another server. Now the magnificent instrument just sat there, silent and waiting. It seemed almost sad, Rachel thought. Like a dancer with no music to dance to. Her fingers started moving on their own, the way they always did when she saw a piano. Tiny movements against the tray she was holding. Muscle memory from years of practice she'd tried hard to forget. Press, lift, stretch. Her thumb tapping out an invisible rhythm, while her other fingers followed patterns worn into her brain from childhood. Rachel caught herself and quickly grabbed another tray from the service station. She couldn't afford to get distracted. Her manager, Linda, was already stressed about being short-staffed tonight. One of the other servers had called in sick, which meant everyone else had to pick up the slack. Rachel, I need you to cover the back section, Linda said, rushing past with a worried expression. The Johnsons' table needs more champagne, and table 12 is asking about dessert timing. On it, Rachel replied, pushing thoughts of the piano out of her mind. But as she worked her way through the ballroom, serving drinks and clearing plates, her eyes kept drifting back to that Steinway. She remembered the first time she'd touched a piano. She'd been 6 years old, and her mom had saved up for months to buy an old upright from a neighbor who was moving. It wasn't fancy, and half the keys stuck. But to little Rachel it had been magical. Her mom had believed in her talent. Really believed in it. She'd worked double shifts at the hospital where she was a nurse, just to pay for Rachel's piano lessons. By the time Rachel was 16, her teacher said she had real potential. The kind of potential that could take her places. Rachel had gotten a scholarship to the state conservatory. Full ride. Her mom had cried happy tears when the acceptance letter came. Everything had been perfect. Rachel was going to be a concert pianist, maybe even tour the world someday. She'd practice 6 hours a day, her fingers flying over the keys, lost in the music. Then her mom got sick. The cancer came fast and mean. One day her mom was fine, the next she was in the hospital getting tests. Within 6 months, the medical bills started piling up. Insurance covered some of it, but not enough. Never enough. Rachel had withdrawn from the conservatory after just 1 semester. She'd needed to work. Needed to help pay for treatments and medications. Her professors had been disappointed. One had even called her at home, trying to convince her to stay, saying she could work something out with financial aid. But Rachel had made up her mind. Family came first, always. Her mom had fought for 2 more years before she passed. 2 years of hospitals and treatments and hoping for miracles that never came. After the funeral, Rachel had sold the old upright piano to help pay off the remaining medical debt. She hadn't played since. That was 7 years ago now. "Excuse me, miss." Rachel snapped back to the present. An elderly gentleman at table 5 was trying to get her attention. He had kind eyes and silver hair, and he wore his tuxedo like someone who'd been to 1,000 fancy parties. "Yes, sir. Can I get you something?" Rachel asked, falling back into her professional tone. The old man smiled, but he wasn't looking at his empty glass or his dessert plate. He was looking at her hands. "I couldn't help but notice," he said gently. "You were looking at the piano. And your fingers. You play, don't you?" Rachel felt her cheeks get hot. She hadn't realized anyone was watching her. I used to, sir," she said quietly. "A long time ago." The gentleman's smile grew wider. He looked genuinely interested, leaning forward slightly in his chair. "How long ago?" 7 years, Rachel admitted. "But I'm working right now, sir. Can I get you anything? Another drink, perhaps?" She tried to redirect the conversation, feeling uncomfortable. Guests didn't usually want to chat with the help about personal stuff. But this man seemed different. He had the air of someone who actually listened when people talked. "I'm fine on drinks, thank you," he said. "But I have a favor to ask. Rather unusual one, actually." Before Rachel could respond, he was standing up. He had that confident way of moving that rich people often had, like the world would naturally accommodate whatever they decided to do. "Would you come with me for just a moment?" he asked. Rachel glanced nervously toward the kitchen, where Linda was coordinating the dessert service. She really shouldn't leave her section. They were already understaffed, but something in the old man's expression made her curious. And maybe, just maybe, a tiny part of her that she'd locked away years ago was waking up, wondering what he wanted. "Just for a moment," she agreed, setting her tray down on a service cart. She had no idea that this simple decision was about to change everything. Rachel followed the elderly gentleman across the ballroom, her heart beating faster with each step. She had no idea what he wanted, but something about the way he walked with purpose made her both nervous and curious at the same time. He stopped near the piano, and Rachel felt her stomach do a little flip. Up close, the instrument was even more beautiful. She could see her reflection in its glossy black surface. "I'm going to be honest with you," the old man said, turning to face her. "I taught music for 40 years. Piano specifically, and in all that time I learned to recognize when someone has a real connection to the instrument. The way you were looking at this piano, the way your fingers moved. That's not someone who just took a few lessons as a kid. That's someone who lived and breathed music." Rachel didn't know what to say. She felt exposed, like he'd seen something she'd been trying to hide even from herself. "Sir, I appreciate that, but I really should get back to work," she started to say. "Just hear me out," he said gently, raising a hand. "The pianist left early tonight. Family emergency, and while I'm sure these fine people are enjoying their conversations, a wedding reception feels incomplete without music, don't you think?" Rachel's eyes widened as she realized what he was suggesting. "Oh no, I couldn't possibly. I haven't played in 7 years. My fingers probably don't even remember how anymore." "Muscle memory is a powerful thing," the old man said with a knowing smile. "It never really leaves you. Trust me on that." Before Rachel could protest further, the gentleman had already caught the attention of a couple standing near the main table. Rachel recognized them immediately. The bride and groom. Her pulse started racing even faster. "Excuse me," the old man called out warmly. "Might I borrow the happy couple for just a moment?" The bride, whose name Rachel had heard was Catherine, walked over with her new husband. Her wedding dress was absolutely stunning, all lace and pearls with a long train that seemed to float behind her. She had the kind of smile that lit up her whole face. "Is everything all right?" the groom asked, looking between the old man and Rachel with friendly concern. "Everything's wonderful," the gentleman assured them, "but I have a slightly unusual request. Your pianist had to leave early, which is perfectly understandable given the circumstances. However, I believe we might have discovered some unexpected talent right here at your reception." He gestured to Rachel, who wanted nothing more than to disappear into the floor. "This young lady is a pianist," he continued, "and I have a very strong feeling she could provide some beautiful music for the rest of your evening. If, of course, she's willing and if you'd both be open to it." Catherine's eyes sparkled with interest. "Really? Oh, that would be wonderful. We were just saying how quiet it felt without the music." I'm working," Rachel stammered, feeling her face grow hot. "I really don't think it's appropriate." The groom, whose name was David, smiled kindly. "If you can play, we'd be honored, truly." This is supposed to be a celebration, and good music makes every celebration better. More people had started to notice the small gathering by the piano. Curious guests turned in their chairs, trying to see what was happening. Rachel felt dozens of eyes on her and wanted to run. "I don't even know what I'd play," she said weakly, knowing she was losing this argument. "I don't have any sheet music." "The best musicians don't need sheet music," the old man said with confidence. "They play from the heart." Rachel looked around desperately for her manager. Linda had appeared at the edge of the crowd, initially looking worried about what was causing the commotion. Rachel caught her eye, silently pleading for rescue, but Linda surprised her. After quickly understanding the situation, her manager walked over and put a gentle hand on Rachel's shoulder. "Go ahead, honey," Linda said softly. "Just one song. Consider it your break. But we're short-staffed and table 12 needs—" "We'll manage," Linda interrupted. "I think this might be important." Rachel looked at the piano, then at the expectant faces surrounding her. The old gentleman had an encouraging expression that reminded her of her first piano teacher. Catherine looked excited, practically bouncing on her toes despite the heavy wedding dress. David had his arm around his new wife, both of them waiting patiently. More guests had gathered now, forming a small semicircle around the piano area. Rachel heard whispers. "What's happening?" "I think she's going to play something." "Who is she?" Rachel took a deep breath. Her hands were shaking as she walked to the piano bench and sat down. The seat was perfectly positioned, clearly adjusted for the professional pianist who'd played earlier. She slid it back just slightly, finding the right distance from the keys. The ivory and black keys stared up at her like old friends she'd abandoned. How many hours had she spent with her hands on keys just like these? How many pieces had she memorized, practiced until her fingers ached? She raised her hands and held them over the keyboard. They trembled slightly, hovering in the air. 7 years. It had been 7 years since she'd done this. What if she'd forgotten everything? What if her fingers stumbled and she embarrassed herself in front of all these people? What if the old man was wrong about muscle memory? Rachel closed her eyes and thought of her mother. She thought of those early morning practice sessions before school. Her mom sitting in the corner of the room with a cup of coffee, listening with her eyes closed. She thought of her mom's face when she'd gotten that conservatory scholarship. Pride. Pure, unconditional pride. "For you, Mom," Rachel whispered under her breath. Then she let her fingers drop to the keys. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major came out tentative and soft. Rachel's fingers felt stiff at first, unfamiliar with the action of these particular keys. But then something remarkable happened. It was like her hands remembered what her mind had tried to forget. The second phrase came easier. The third flowed naturally. By the fourth measure, Rachel wasn't thinking about technique or finger positions or anything technical at all. She was just playing. The music swelled and dipped, each note following the next as naturally as breathing. The melody was romantic and melancholic, the kind of piece that seemed to hold all of life's beauty and sadness at the same time. Rachel's fingers moved across the keys with increasing confidence, finding the dynamics, the subtle shadings that made Chopin so special. She'd forgotten how good this felt. How right. The ballroom had gone completely silent except for the piano. Every conversation had stopped mid-sentence. Guests who'd been heading to the bar froze in their tracks. Even the catering staff had stopped working to listen. Rachel was completely unaware of any of it. Her eyes were closed now and she was somewhere else entirely. She was 16 again, playing for her mom in their small living room. She was 20, performing in her conservatory's recital hall. She was every age she'd ever been when music was the most important thing in her world. The piece built to its emotional peak, Rachel's hand stretching to reach the wider intervals, her body swaying slightly with the phrasing. Then gradually it softened again, becoming intimate and tender. The final notes hung in the air like a whispered secret before fading into silence. Rachel opened her eyes and lifted her hands from the keys. For a moment she'd forgotten where she was. She blinked, coming back to reality, and suddenly remembered the ballroom, the wedding, all the people. She turned slightly on the bench and saw something that took her breath away. Every single person in the room was staring at her. Some had their hands covering their mouths. Others had tears running down their cheeks. Catherine was openly crying, mascara starting to smudge, while David held her close with his own eyes looking suspiciously wet. The old gentleman who'd started all this was smiling so wide his face might split. his eyes shining with something that looked like triumph, and then the room exploded with applause. The sound of applause washed over Rachel like a wave. She sat frozen on the piano bench, her hand still hovering over the keys, completely overwhelmed by what was happening. 200 people were on their feet, clapping so hard the chandeliers seemed to shake. She'd expected maybe some polite applause, a few nods, perhaps a smile or two, but this was something else entirely. Catherine was the first to reach her, nearly tripping over her wedding dress in her hurry. Tears were streaming down her face, and she didn't seem to care one bit about her makeup. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard," Catherine said, her voice thick with emotion. She grabbed Rachel's hands and squeezed them tight. "Thank you. Thank you so much." David appeared right behind his bride, looking equally moved. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked, shaking his head in disbelief. Rachel stood up from the bench, her legs feeling shaky. She was suddenly very aware of her server's uniform, the simple black pants and white button-up shirt that marked her as staff, not a guest. She felt out of place standing here, being thanked by the bride and groom while everyone watched. I studied for a while," she managed to say. "A long time ago." "A while?" The elderly gentleman stepped forward, still beaming. "Young lady, that wasn't just competent playing. That was artistry. Real, genuine artistry. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" Rachel didn't know what to say. She'd spent 7 years trying to convince herself that giving up music had been the right choice, the only choice. And now, after just one song, all those carefully built walls were crumbling. "Could you play another one?" a woman called out from the crowd. "Please?" Others immediately joined in, their voices overlapping. "Yes, please. That was incredible." "Just one more." Rachel looked at Linda, her manager, silently asking for permission. Linda was standing near the kitchen entrance, and Rachel was shocked to see tears on her face, too. Linda never cried. She was tough as nails, always professional, always in control. Linda wiped her eyes quickly and nodded, giving Rachel a thumbs up. "I suppose I could play one more," Rachel said softly. The crowd cheered like she'd just announced she was giving away free money. Rachel couldn't help but smile a little despite her nerves. She sat back down at the piano, taking a moment to decide what to play next. Her fingers found the keys again, and this time she chose something different. Debussy's Clair de Lune, Moonlight. It was a piece her mother had loved, always asking Rachel to play it on Sunday mornings while she made breakfast. The opening notes were gentle and dreamy, like ripples on water. Rachel let herself sink into the music, not thinking about the crowd anymore, not worrying about being perfect. She just played the way she used to play for her mom. Honest, emotional, real. The melody floated through the ballroom, transforming the space. It didn't feel like a wedding reception anymore. It felt like something sacred, like everyone had stumbled into a private moment they were privileged to witness. Rachel's fingers danced across the keys, sometimes soft as a whisper, sometimes building to powerful swells that filled every corner of the room. The middle section grew more intense, more passionate before settling back into that peaceful, moonlit feeling. What Rachel didn't know was that at least a dozen people had pulled out their phones. They were recording, capturing every moment. The lighting in the ballroom was perfect, the acoustics were crystal clear, and Rachel was giving the performance of a lifetime. One guest in particular, a young woman named Jennifer, who was Catherine's best friend and maid of honor, was live streaming the whole thing. Jennifer had over 1 million followers on social media. She was known for sharing interesting moments from her life, and she knew immediately that this was special. "You guys," she whispered into her phone, keeping it steady on Rachel. "You have to hear this. Wedding server just sat down at the piano, and she's absolutely incredible. This is giving me chills." Comments started flooding in on the live stream immediately. "Wow, who is she? This is amazing. I'm crying at work, and can someone tell me what song this is?" But Rachel knew nothing about any of this. She was lost in the music, her eyes closed again, remembering Sunday mornings with her mom, the smell of coffee and pancakes, her mom humming along softly, the way sunshine would come through their kitchen window and make patterns on the old upright piano. As she played the final, delicate phrases of Clair de Lune, Rachel felt something shift inside her chest. It hurt, but in a good way, like a muscle that had been clenched tight for years finally relaxing. The last note faded into silence, and once again the room erupted in applause. But this time it was even louder, even more enthusiastic. People were shouting bravo and whistling. Catherine was full-on sobbing now, being comforted by 3 bridesmaids who were also wiping their eyes. Rachel stood and gave a small, awkward bow. She didn't really know what else to do. She'd never performed for anyone except her teachers and her mom. She certainly had never experienced anything like this. "One more," someone shouted. The crowd took up the chant. "One more. One more." Rachel laughed, feeling tears prick her own eyes now. The emotion of the moment was catching up with her. 7 years of buried feelings were trying to surface all at once. "Okay," she said, her voice barely carrying over the noise. "One more. But then I really do need to get back to work." This time, Rachel chose something bigger, bolder. She'd been playing it safe with the first 2 pieces, sticking to what she knew she could handle. But now, with adrenaline pumping through her veins and her confidence growing, she decided to take a risk. Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor. It was a dramatic, powerful piece. Demanding. The kind of music that required not just technical skill, but real emotional commitment. Rachel's hands came down on the opening chords with surprising force. The sound was huge, filling the ballroom like thunder. Several people actually jumped, startled by the intensity. Then she was off, her fingers flying across the keys in rapid passages that would have been impossible for most pianists. But Rachel's years of training came flooding back. Her hands knew exactly where to go, exactly how much pressure to apply, exactly when to pull back and when to push forward. The music was dark and haunting, full of tension and drama. It built and built, climbing higher and higher, Rachel's whole body involved now, leaning into the instrument, pulling every ounce of sound from it. The other servers had completely abandoned their duties. They stood in a cluster near the kitchen, watching with their mouths open. Even the chef had come out, his white hat still on, a spatula forgotten in his hand. The elderly gentleman who'd started all this was standing with his hand over his heart, looking like he might faint from excitement. He kept shaking his head slowly as if he couldn't quite believe what he was witnessing. Rachel drove the piece toward its climax, the chords becoming more and more intense, her fingers hammering the keys with controlled power. The ballroom felt electric, charged with energy. And then, with a final series of descending chords that seemed to echo in everyone's chest, the piece ended. The silence that followed lasted only a heartbeat before the ballroom absolutely exploded. People weren't just clapping anymore. They were cheering, shouting, some even crying. Catherine had given up on trying to preserve her makeup and was openly weeping. David looked stunned, like he'd just witnessed something he'd never forget. Rachel stood on shaky legs and curtsied again, this time less awkwardly. She was breathing hard, her heart pounding from the exertion and the emotion. Her fingers tingled from the intensity of the playing. As the applause continued, Rachel glanced around the room and noticed something she hadn't seen before. Nearly everyone had their phones out. They were filming, taking pictures, typing furiously. Her stomach did a little flip. She hadn't thought about that. Hadn't considered that this moment might be captured and shared, but there was nothing she could do about it now. What was done was done. Rachel made her way back through the crowd, her legs still feeling unsteady. Guests kept stopping her, wanting to shake her hand or tell her how much the music had meant to them. An older woman grabbed her arm gently and said, "You made me feel like I was 20 years old again, dancing with my late husband. Thank you for that gift." By the time Rachel reached the kitchen, she was completely overwhelmed. Linda met her at the entrance, and to Rachel's surprise, her tough-as-nails manager pulled her into a tight hug. "I had no idea," Linda said quietly. "In 3 years, I never knew you could do that." "I don't really talk about it," Rachel admitted, pulling back and wiping at her eyes. "It's complicated." "Well, honey, you need to uncomplicate it." That was something special. Rachel tried to get back to work, but it was impossible. Guests kept approaching her throughout the rest of the evening. The groom's father pressed a $100 bill into her hand as a tip, even though she protested. Catherine hugged her 3 more times, each time crying all over again. The elderly gentleman found her near the end of the night as she was clearing dessert plates. "I didn't get a chance to properly introduce myself," he said, extending his hand. "My name is William Chen. I was a professor of music for 40 years before I retired." Rachel shook his hand, suddenly understanding why he'd been so insistent about her playing. "I know talent when I see it," William continued, And you, my dear, have something truly rare. May I ask why you stopped playing? Rachel hesitated, then found herself telling him the whole story. Her mom's cancer, leaving the conservatory, the medical bills that had swallowed her dreams whole. William listened without interrupting, his kind eyes never leaving her face. Life isn't fair sometimes, he said when she finished, but your mother would want you to play. You know that, don't you? Rachel nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Here's my card, William said, pulling one from his wallet. Call me, please, I'd like to help if I can. Rachel took the card, thanking him, but doubted she'd actually call. People said things like that all the time. They meant well, but nothing ever really came of it. She finished her shift around midnight, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with carrying heavy trays. Her emotions felt raw, exposed. She changed out of her uniform in the staff room and headed to the parking lot, ready to go home and process everything that had happened. What Rachel didn't know was that while she slept that night, something extraordinary was taking place. Jennifer's live stream had been viewed by over 50,000 people in real time. After it ended, she posted the full video to her account with the caption, "Wedding server turns out to be a piano virtuoso." This gave me chills. Who is she? The video started spreading. Fast, people shared it with friends. Music teachers shared it with students. Professional pianists shared it with their followers, analyzing Rachel's technique and marveling at her emotional depth. The video jumped from platform to platform, gaining momentum like a snowball rolling downhill. By 3 a.m, it had 1 million views. By sunrise, it had 5 million. Rachel woke up around 9, her phone buzzing on her nightstand. She grabbed it groggily, expecting maybe a text from Linda about next week's schedule. Instead, her screen was completely filled with notifications. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands friend requests, tags, messages from people she'd never heard of, comments on posts she didn't remember making. What in the world? Rachel mumbled, sitting up in bed. She opened her social media app and immediately saw herself. Her own face staring back at her from multiple videos, all from last night. The view counts were insane. 3 million, 7 million, 10 million. Oh my God, Rachel whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. The comments were overwhelming. This made me cry at work. Who is this woman? She needs a recording contract. The way she plays Rachmaninoff is insane. I've been playing piano for 20 years and I can't do what she just did. This is the most beautiful thing I've seen all year. Her phone rang, startling her so badly she nearly dropped it. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of her. Hello? Is this Rachel? The pianist from the wedding last night? A professional-sounding woman asked. Yes? Who is this? My name is Patricia Moore. I'm a producer for Morning News Today. We'd love to have you on the show to talk about your performance. It's going viral everywhere. Rachel's head spun. What? I don't understand. The video from last night? You've been viewed over 15 million times across all platforms. People are calling you the mystery wedding pianist. We'd like to interview you tomorrow morning if you're available. Rachel said she'd think about it and hung up, her hands shaking. The phone immediately rang again. Another news outlet. Then another. Then a music magazine. Then someone claiming to be from a record label. She stopped answering and just stared at her phone as notifications continued to pour in. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. She was a server at a wedding venue. She hadn't played piano seriously in 7 years. A text came through from Linda. Have you seen what's happening? Call me? Then a text from one of her co-workers. You're famous. This is crazy. Rachel got out of bed and paced her small apartment, trying to make sense of everything. She pulled up one of the videos and watched herself play. It was strange seeing herself from the outside. She looked so focused, so lost in the music. She barely recognized the person on screen. The comments kept streaming in faster than she could read them. She plays with such emotion. You can tell she's been through something. This is what pure talent looks like. Forget everything else on the internet today. Watch this. Professional musicians were weighing in too. A famous concert pianist had shared the video saying, "This is extraordinary. Technical precision combined with deep emotional understanding. Whoever this young woman is, she deserves to be on the world's biggest stages." Rachel sat down on her couch, overwhelmed. Her phone rang again. This time it was William, the retired music professor from last night. "Rachel, I hope I'm not bothering you," he said when she answered. "But I've been up since 6 making phone calls." "Mr. Chen, what's happening?" "I don't understand any of this." "You're happening," he said warmly. "The world is discovering what I saw last night. Real genuine talent, and I meant what I said about wanting to help. I appreciate that, but I called in some favors this morning," William interrupted gently. "I was the dean at Berkshire Conservatory before I retired. Do you know it?" Rachel's breath caught. Berkshire was one of the most prestigious music schools in the country. "Of course I know it. I spoke with the current dean this morning. Showed him the videos. Rachel, they want to offer you a full scholarship, not just tuition. Housing, living expenses, everything. You could finish your degree." Rachel couldn't speak. Her throat had closed up completely. "I know it's a lot to take in," William continued, "but opportunities like this don't come around often. Your mother sacrificed so you could pursue music. Maybe it's time to honor that sacrifice by actually pursuing it." After William hung up, Rachel sat in stunned silence. Her phone continued buzzing with messages and calls, but she ignored all of it. She walked to her closet and pulled out a box from the top shelf. Inside was a photo of her and her mom at her conservatory acceptance ceremony, both of them grinning like they'd won the lottery. "What do I do, Mom?" Rachel whispered to the photo. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Catherine, the bride from last night. "My husband and I want you to know that you made our wedding unforgettable. Whatever happens next, thank you for reminding everyone that magic still exists." Rachel read the message 3 times, tears sliding down her cheeks. Maybe, just maybe, this was her second chance. The next week passed in a blur. Rachel gave interviews to 3 different news shows, each one surreal and overwhelming in its own way. Sitting in television studios wearing borrowed clothes and makeup done by professionals felt like living in someone else's life. "So when did you know you had this gift?" one interviewer asked her, leaning forward with genuine interest. Rachel thought about it carefully. "I don't know if I'd call it a gift exactly. It's more like something I couldn't not do, if that makes sense. When I was young, playing piano felt as natural as breathing. It was the language I used to say things I couldn't put into words." The interviewer nodded. "And yet you stopped playing for 7 years. That must have been incredibly difficult." "It was," Rachel admitted, her voice catching slightly. "But my mom needed me, and I'd make the same choice again if I had to. Some things are more important than dreams." That clip went viral too. People responded to her honesty, her humility. She wasn't trying to be a celebrity. She was just a regular person who'd been given an unexpected second chance. The scholarship offer from Berkshire Conservatory was real. William had worked out all the details. They'd cover everything, including a small monthly stipend for expenses. Rachel could start in the fall semester, which gave her a few months to prepare. But the opportunities didn't stop there. A small independent classical music label reached out, interested in recording an album. "Nothing big or commercial," the producer explained over the phone. "Just you, a piano, and the pieces you love most. The kind of album that matters." Rachel said yes before she could overthink it. Catherine and David, the newlyweds, did something that completely shocked Rachel. They started a crowdfunding campaign without telling her. "Help the Wedding Pianist Follow Her Dreams," read the title. They explained Rachel's story, how she'd sacrificed her education to care for her sick mother, how she'd been working as a server to make ends meet. The campaign's goal was $10,000, just enough to help Rachel get settled and buy some things she'd need for school. It reached that goal in 6 hours. By the end of the week, it had raised over $80,000. Rachel cried when Catherine called to tell her. "I don't deserve this," she kept saying. "Yes, you do," Catherine insisted firmly. "You gave us the most beautiful gift on our wedding day. Let people give something back to you. Let them be part of your story." The support wasn't just financial. Professional pianists reached out offering advice and mentorship. Her old conservatory teacher, the one who'd tried to convince her to stay 7 years ago, sent a long email saying how proud he was and offering to give her refresher lessons before school started. Even strangers sent encouraging messages. "My daughter wants to be a musician and I've been discouraging her because it's not practical," one woman wrote. "But watching your story made me realize I might be wrong. Thank you for that." Rachel went back to work at Riverside Manor one last time. Linda had tried to convince her to leave immediately, to focus on her music. But Rachel insisted on working her final 2 weeks. I don't want to leave you guys in the lurch, she explained. On her last shift, the staff threw her a surprise party in the break room. There was a sheet cake decorated with piano keys and the words, "Follow your dreams." Her coworkers had all signed a card, many of them writing things that made Rachel tear up. "You showed us that it's never too late," one coworker wrote. "Thank you for reminding me to believe in something," another said. Linda pulled Rachel aside before she left. "You know what the best part of all this is?" Her former manager said. "You didn't change. You went viral, you got famous, you had all these opportunities fall in your lap, and you're still the same kind, hardworking person you've always been." "I don't know about that," Rachel said. "I feel pretty different inside." "Different how?" Rachel thought about it. "Hopeful, I guess. Like maybe good things can actually happen. Like maybe it's okay to want something for myself." Linda hugged her tight. "Your mom would be so proud of you." The months before school started were intense. Rachel practiced 4 to 5 hours a day, rebuilding technique and stamina she'd lost. Her fingers hurt at first, the muscles having forgotten the sustained demands of serious playing. But gradually it all came back, smoother and more natural each day. William stopped by her apartment once a week to give her informal lessons. He'd bring coffee and pastries, and they'd spend hours at her newly purchased keyboard, working through repertoire and discussing interpretation. "You have something most pianists spend their whole lives searching for," William told her during one session. "You understand the emotional truth of the music. The technical stuff we can work on. But that emotional connection, that's rare and precious." Rachel also started seeing a therapist, something she'd never done before. She needed help processing everything that had happened, both recently and 7 years ago. She'd been carrying so much grief and guilt about her mom, about giving up music, about all the what-ifs that haunted her. "You made the most loving choice you could at the time," her therapist told her. "That's nothing to feel guilty about. Your mom knew how much you loved her, and I think she'd want you to forgive yourself and move forward." August arrived faster than Rachel expected. She packed up her small apartment, loading everything she owned into a rented van. It wasn't much. Some clothes, books, her keyboard, and a few precious items that had belonged to her mom. The drive to Berkshire Conservatory took 4 hours. Rachel spent most of it talking to her mom, something she did often now without feeling quite so sad. "I'm doing it, Mom," she said to the empty van. "I'm actually doing it. I'm terrified, but I'm doing it." The campus was beautiful, all old brick buildings and tree-lined paths. Students were everywhere, lugging instruments and boxes, parents helping with move-in day. Rachel felt ancient compared to most of them. She was 28, nearly a decade older than the typical incoming student. But when she walked into the practice rooms and heard the overlapping sounds of pianos, violins, voices, and cellos all mixing together, she knew she was exactly where she belonged. William met her for dinner that first week. They ate at a quiet restaurant near campus, and he asked her how she was settling in. "It's overwhelming," Rachel admitted, "but in the best way. I forgot what it felt like to be surrounded by people who understand this obsession with music. People who don't think it's weird that I want to practice for 6 hours. And your classmates. How are they treating you?" Rachel smiled. "Most of them recognized me from the videos. A few asked for selfies, which was bizarre. But they've been really welcoming. I think they just see me as another student trying to learn and improve." "That's exactly what you are," William said warmly. 6 months later, Rachel stood backstage at Carnegie Hall waiting to perform as part of an emerging artist showcase. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear. From excitement. From gratitude. From the sheer overwhelming joy of being alive and getting to do this thing she loved. She wore a simple black concert dress, her hair pulled back, no elaborate styling. She wanted the focus to be on the music, nothing else. William sat in the front row, beaming with pride. So did Linda and several of her former co-workers who'd all made the trip. Catherine and David were there too, holding hands. And scattered throughout the audience were dozens of people who'd followed her story online. Strangers who felt like friends because they'd been part of her journey. As Rachel walked onto the stage, the applause was immediate and warm. She took her seat at the piano, adjusted the bench, and looked out at the audience. The lights were bright, but she could see their faces. All these people who believed in her. She thought of her mom. She thought of that night at the wedding reception when everything changed. She thought of all the years she'd spent convinced her dreams were dead and gone forever. Then, Rachel placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The music that filled Carnegie Hall that night wasn't just notes on a page. It was a story. A story about loss and love, about sacrifice and second chances, about dreams that refuse to die no matter how hard you try to bury them. It was Rachel's story, and she was finally ready to share it with the world. When the final note faded and the audience rose to their feet, Rachel stood and took a bow. Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling. Really, truly smiling. She'd found her way back home, and it felt exactly right.